Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to Journal with Me. Over the next few videos, we are going to be working on creating an Alice junk journal. So this is a journal that I will be deconstructing with you on camera and creating a new journal with it. This is a journal that I will be using alongside my Queen Alice Tarot. So it is going to have an Alice in Wonderland theme. So we will be working together over the next few videos to create this journal here. And I will give you just a quick sneak peek of what we will be creating together. And you can see that there are lots of different pages and lots of goodies in here. So I invite you to join me on this step-by-step process and really a tutorial on how I go about creating a junk journal. This one does not have a fabric cover, so I will be addressing that in a separate video. So let's go ahead and get started. So for this process, we're going to be taking this hardback Alice book that I got. It is used and I got it online, and we are going to be turning it into a junk journal similar to my Nicoletta. Now for this particular project, I'm not going to cover the front in fabric because I actually do want to keep this front the way that it is because I think it will work really great. Sometimes when you're creating a junk journal, you don't necessarily need to cover the front. It depends on what book you're using. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar about what a junk journal is, a junk journal is basically a handmade book. And what makes it sort of a junk journal is that it is filled with all kinds of different papers and layers and different textures. We have, you know, things that flip up, things that flip out. So this is how I use this in terms of working with a tarot deck. Now, just to show you that, you know, you can use it, you can create a junk journal for any kind of journaling process. This is just a basic junk journal that I created. And you can see here that it has just different pages. It has kind of a, you know, botanical theme to it. And I've just added in like some coffee dyed papers. I have different pages from books that I've cut out. I've made pockets. I have, you know, again, more pages from books, pages from journals that I've removed the journaling pages out of it. And you can add all these different layers and texture to completely custom create a journal that works for you. So this is just an example of one type of junk journal. This particular one has 3 signatures similar to my Nicoletta, and you can see them here. There's one booklet here, one here, and one here. Those get sewn together and then sewn into the book, and that's a process that we will go through as we create the Alice journal. So you can use a junk journal process for more than just hardback books. So these have been, this one and my Nicoletta are both hardback books that have been gutted and recovered to create whatever look I was going for. With the Alice journal, we won't be recovering it because I actually like the cover the way that it is. But just to show you, you can also do junk journals for, like, say, your traveler's notebook. So here is a botanical one that I created. And again, it's the same process. It's just cut to size to slip into my traveler's notebook. And it uses different pages and different types of papers. And I have layering. I have pockets where I have journaling cards and bookmarks tucked in here, little pull-outs. And it just allows me to set up the book the way that I want to. So here, for example, you've probably seen this. I have a video on this one as well about making my own traveler's notebook, or I think it was called Moving into a Traveler's Notebook. This is my tarot section, and it is similar to one of my larger junk journals, just on a smaller scale. It is a insert that is actually 3 signatures sewn in. So the first section here is my deck study section. So here is one grouping of pages that was sewn together and then sewn into the binding. And here is my section, which is my little white book and all of my personal interpretations for the cards. And then this back section is my spreads. So this is one booklet sewn in here, another here, and another here, which creates this whole insert. So that's the thing that I really like about the junk journals, besides the fact that it allows you to do all this lovely layering and texture and add all this interest that you can, of course, you know, you can journal, scrapbook, paint, stick pictures, cards, printouts. You can put it right on top of here, and that adds to that beautiful layered effect for the journal. But the one thing that's really great about it is that it allows you to completely custom create your journal to fit whatever you're looking to hold in that journal, whatever you're looking to record. So that's one of the things that I really like about a junk journal. I believe the term junk journal originally came from an idea of taking your junk, your trash basically, and throwing that into a notebook and basically reusing it. So I believe that that is where the original term came from. But of course now we use it as, you know, a way to basically make beautiful layered journals that have all this wonderful kind of scrapbooky layering. I mean, you can see I've done some sewing in here, and it gives it just a wonderful personal effect, and it's beautiful. And this one in particular is basically attuned to a certain deck, so I only use this one with my Nicoletta, whereas more of my standard junk journals, they are used for, you know, whatever it is that I've set them out for. So I have junk journals specifically for decks. I have junk journals for personal journaling. I have junk journals for my personal practice, my spiritual practice, junk journals for tarot. And that just allows me to create all kinds of different, very personalized, really very special books to fit whatever I'm currently working with. Let's go ahead and get started on this process. And I'm going to walk you through step by step how I would create a journal. The only portion that we are not going to cover in this video is actually covering the book with fabric. Maybe I'll do that in a kind of add-on video, but I do not want to cover up this beautiful cover. One of the reasons I bought this book was because I really liked the cover image, and it went well with my Dame Darcy Queen Alice tarot, which is what this book is going to be. It is a rather thick book, as you can see. This is a hefty book, so there is going to be a lot of pages needed to fill this book out. You can see it in comparison to my Nicoletta. You know, there's quite a bit of difference. So for this one, I'm going to have to do probably more than 3 signatures. Maybe you need 4 to 5, or I'm going to have to make them really, really thick. And we'll talk about that more when we get to the section about making the signatures. Having said that, let's go ahead and get started with this project. So to start with, the very first thing we need to do is we need to gut our cover. Whatever book that we are using for our cover, we need to take all of these pages out of it. And look how awesome this binding is, this cover page. So I might actually try to salvage this because it is quite beautiful. When we talk about removing binding, you'll see that that may not necessarily be possible. So the thing that we need to keep an eye out for is that when you're removing the binding, when you see here, hopefully you can see here that this particular book, the binding it's a free floating binding. So this is actually going to be a much easier book to deconstruct because that binding is not attached to the actual outer layer of the book. Now there are examples of books. This is a book that I bought to deconstruct to pull pages out of, which we will talk about. This one, as you can see, also has a little bit of a free floating binding, but it's a lot tighter. So this one is going to be a little bit harder to deconstruct when we get there, but you know, we'll make it work. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is to basically cut this book block with its beautiful gold gilded pages. We want to cut this out. Now I am going to try to cut this out and save it and get it, hopefully keep it as intact as possible because I do want to pull some of these lovely pages into my book. So the first thing that we're going to do is to pull these covers back, and I'm going to hopefully very carefully cut this binding away using a craft knife. Now I really would like to save this front and back, which is not something I would normally do, but it's pretty cool and I want to see, as you can see here where this pink ribbon is, hopefully all this is showing up on camera, this first page is actually glued to the first page of that binding. So I don't know that I'm going to be able to get it away without ruining it. As you can see here, I can pull this away pretty good. So normally what I would do is just take a craft knife and run it right down here and try not to hit this seam, because we don't want to accidentally nick our outer cover. If we do, you can fix it. It's harder to fix if you're not going to be recovering the cover like I am, but if you do nick it and then you're covering it with fabric, you can just use some duct tape, cover up where you nicked, and then cover that with fabric. But I am not covering this book in fabric, so I'm going to try really hard not to nick the cover. There is generally glue that is adhered to this inside binding, and this is a used book, so you can see, if you can see this insert in here, generally this insert would be glued as well, but this one is a little bit older, so it's kind of coming apart. So in looking at this, I don't think I'm going to be able to salvage much. You can see here I'm kind of pulling this front page away. If I could very carefully now generally, like I said, I wouldn't be trying to save this section, but I think this is really cool, so I'm gonna hang on to it and see if I can get that to stay as part of my book. Now hopefully you can see here, this brown meshy stuff is actually the webbing that is glued on. So I am going to very carefully cut my way through that webbing to release this book block from the binding. And again, like I said, I am going very carefully because I don't want to cut into my outer cover because I'm trying to use that. So hopefully you can see here that it's this webbing right here that I'm very carefully cutting through. And it is attached to a piece of cardboard. Leaving this page on is impeding my ability to see it at the moment, but we're gonna work around it. Which, like I said, is not something I generally do. So there we've removed one side of the binding, and I didn't nick into my book cover at all, which is fabulous. So here you can see the whole book block is coming together. So now I'm going to carefully flip it around the other way and see if I can get this one to come away. Sometimes the back of the book is a little bit harder because it's in there a little bit tighter, and basically I'm just pulling to try and release the glue a little bit from that inner binding. And I'm just basically going to repeat the process. I'm going very lightly to start with because the first thing I'm trying to do is just release this paper, because I need to be able to see where that webbing is. And now I can sort of see that webbing in there. And I don't recommend putting your fingers in front of your craft knife like I just did. And as you work it through, you can kind of start pulling the binding away, which gives it a little bit more playroom. And like I said, the back of the book can be harder than the front sometimes. So I'm keeping closer to the book block than I am to the cover because, as again, sound like a broken record, but I don't want to cut into my cover because I don't want to have to cover it. I want to be able to keep this beautiful cover. That's the whole reason why I purchased this particular book. Okay, so there we have, here is the book block. Look at that massive thing. And this has got great illustrations and some great pages in it. So I'm gonna hang on to this because I'll be using this in the journal as well, or pieces and parts of it. So now we have basically just our shell. So how cool is that? So this is going to provide the base for our journal, and I did manage to save those two inside covers, so I'll be able to make use of that. I probably won't end up needing these two looser sheets because I need to, I'll need to be able to glue my binding over the top of it, but I'm gonna leave them in there for right now. So at this point, if we're gonna detour just for a second. If we were creating a fabric cover like I have done here, at this point, once we have our book completely, our cover completely free, this is the step where we would actually go ahead and cover it. Now the one thing, I want to get the other book. So let's actually take a look at this one instead, because this one actually has ribbons as well. So once you have your cover cut free, you basically want to take this flat piece and you're going to cover it with fabric. Maybe I'll do a separate video on that because there is kind of a technique to it. So at this point you would cover your book cover, and you would want to go ahead and insert your ribbon. Now you can save this process to the end. That's totally fine as well. You can go ahead and put all your pages together, get all your signatures sewn and all of that good stuff, and then do the book cover at the end. I like to do it in the beginning because I have on occasion forgotten to put my ribbon closure in, and then trying to go back and re-peel up the pages is not a fabulous process. So what I'm going to do here is just see if there is a chance that this inside cover is going to lift away. And it doesn't look like, because it's glued down to the binding, it's not. But in this instance, what I could do, because I can't use these flaps. Okay, so this flappy part right here, because I'm going to be using a fabric binding like I've done in this one, and you can see it here, because I want that fabric binding to show. If I had a flap of paper right here, I wouldn't be able to get that binding in there over the top. And this, again, you could still do it, but personal preference, I like to have that binding showing in there. So I don't want to affix this paper here, if that makes sense. But I really do like this paper, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make use of it in order to get a ribbon closure on this book. So I will show you how the ribbon process goes in a sort of modified version. I'm actually going to attach it in here and then glue this over the top so I get those lovely papers. This beautiful paper here still will be in my book, but I'll also be able to have the ribbon closure on it. So at this point, what we need to do is get some ribbon. So let's see. So generally, the process would be, if you were covering this with fabric and redoing the inside covers, you would take your ribbon and you would measure it out. I usually go 3 times the length, basically. So I have one length here, one length here, and one length here. Now that gives me lots to work with and probably way more than I need, but I'd rather have too much than not enough. So we're gonna pull this out of the way. Okay. Now the process would generally be to take the ribbon, find the center point, and then you would basically take your ribbon and you would glue with a strip of glue here, and then you would glue your ribbon down across the front. Now you would do this after you have covered the front, but before you put your inside covers on. And again, like I said, I'll try to cover that in a different video, but because this particular video, I'm not using a fabric cover, we have to modify the process a little bit. So for this one, I'm only gonna do half, basically. I'm not gonna come to full center. I'm gonna glue the ribbon underneath this paper, and that's going to give me that effect of that ribbon closure, but kind of cheat it, if that makes sense. So I think that what we can do here is you can kind of get a sense of, if you kind of put the ribbon in the middle and you close the book, you can kind of get a sense of how much is going to be left over. Now, I always just leave this and I trim it at the end once I get my papers in there. But that will give you a sense of to know whether or not you have enough, because once you glue this all in, it is very difficult to remove. So you can see here that I've cut quite a bit extra, way more than I need to actually tie a ribbon. But that's so that I can trim it in the end. So for this particular style, what we're going to do, and this probably wasn't like the best journal to do this with, because I do want to keep these pages and I do want to keep the outside cover. But like I said, maybe we'll do another one where I do completely fabric cover. So because I'm keeping these and I'm not adding and I'm not gluing this down to the center and then laying my papers over the top of it, I'm actually going to go between the two pages that are already there. I am going to cut this in half. I'm going to get some paper towel, because you always need paper towel when you're working with fabric tack. So I'm going to take one side and I'm going to go in my in-between here. If I can carefully lift that up, and I'm basically going to find the center. Again, it's not like life or death if your ribbon is not completely centered. So I want it about here. And again, I'm just eyeballing. So I'm going to take and I'm going to run some glue, holding my ribbon in place. I'm going to run some glue here and run some glue here. And I'm going to bring it right to that edge. Make sure we get plenty in there. And we're going to lay this down and flatten it out. Now, another reason why I like to go ahead and do the cover first is because that way it gets plenty of time to dry before I start trying to sew pages into it. And I just glue the rest of that side down. As you can see with the fabric tack, it moves around a little bit, so having some drying time is always a good thing. And you can, with the fabric tack, kind of scoot it around and futz with it a little bit. So I've got this one sewn in. So now basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this flat, and then you can see it makes a ribbon insert. I'm going to sew. Did I say sew? I'm going to glue it flat. So basically, and I'm going to glue from this side so that I don't get any excess seepage over the edge. Because whenever you fold paper, it you lose just a tiny bit whenever you fold it over. And I'm going to make sure that I get this center in here really good. And now I'm going to very carefully fold that over. And as you can see, I'm kind of squishing the binding down because I really want that to be good and adhered. I don't want it lifting on me. So I'm going to really press those edges and corners down. Okay, and now I'm basically just going to repeat the process for the other side. So now that this cover is basically done, I mean, we will add more once we get our book inserts in, but as you can see here, I have my cover, I have my ribbon closure, and you can see the insides here. I've used the papers that were already there. Again, totally optional. You could cover this with scrapbook paper as well. So you'd basically just pull your fabric around, pull it tight, get it in there, and then glue your ribbon down and then lay your cover paper over the top of it. So this I now set aside to let it dry, and this is a great thing to do if you're, especially if you're doing a fabric cover, because you want to give it as much drying time as possible before you start, you know, really handling this book too much and you know, putting in the signatures and all that kind of good stuff. Let me show you now how we deconstruct a book block. This piece is glued to the binding. It's not sewn in, so I'm just going to rip this off because I like this and I might want to incorporate that into my book. So I'm going to hold on to that. Again, another page. I think this one, if you pull back the bindings, you can see the little kind of tuck marks where the book is sewn in, or where the pages are sewn in. So that gives you an indication that the pages are bound in with thread rather than glued in. But sometimes in the paperbacks you find that there is no stitching, it's just glued, and in that case, I have a couple books that I've deconstructed that have been that way, and at that case you just have to tear out the pages and be okay with not having a folded insert, which will make more sense when we actually get to the binding process. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to start deconstructing this one into all of the loose pages. So I'm going to look for the stitching, and this is what I'm after, is because I want to remove this stitching, which will allow me to take out sections of the book. Now I could just go through this and remove just the sections that I want, and that works totally well. That works just as well, but for the purposes of this project, I am going to go ahead and deconstruct the whole book, and because I will be using these for other things anyway. So basically you're just going to find where these stitches are. So the stitches are in between each of the signatures, and you're just going to very carefully cut them free. And this can be a little bit tricky to do with a really thickly bound book like this. Sometimes a craft knife works best. Sometimes a pair of small scissors is easier. The goal is not to rip the pages, and that will make more sense, like I said, when we get to actually putting our signatures together. There are usually 2 layers of thread in each of these, so you want to make sure you get through them both, otherwise you'll just rip your pages when you're trying to take it out. Like I said, sometimes it depends on how loose your binding is. Sometimes a little pair of scissors is all you need, and sometimes a craft knife works better. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to kind of fold it over. This one might be glued because sometimes your front pages are glued in. So as you can see, this one just popped out, so I have basically a whole spread, right? A whole page that fits the exact size of this book. So that will be something that we will probably be using later. Maybe not this particular page, but again, like I said, it'll make more sense when we actually get to building the books or the signatures. So I'm gonna just start popping these out, and I try to keep them in order, which again, we'll talk about here in a minute. So I'm trying to keep the signatures in order as best I can without, I see that one is, I've got, there we go. Okay. So now you can see these are all free floating pages here. Sometimes there's a little bit of glue that seeps through onto these first few pages when they glue the bindings in. So you just want to very carefully release them. All right, so you can see here I have all of these free floating pages, and this I can sew back into my book. And the reason I keep them in order is because if I wanted to sew more than one page, say I wanted to sew a small section or maybe a short story, and I wanted the whole thing, I can, if I keep them together, then my pages are all gonna line up and I'm not gonna have to cut off the excess. And again, will make more sense when we get to that point. So there's that one. So I'm just gonna move my way through the book and look for where my binding is. These bigger books can be a bit more difficult to work with because they're just, you know, they're hefty, they're big. So I'm basically just pulling back my binding. If you have a big book like this that you're gonna deconstruct, like this, a big thick one like this, I do recommend just taking the cover off, because that way you can kind of bend this and work this cardboard. You can even pull it off. You know, it's not really cardboard, it's more card paper. But you can pull that off and you can kind of work it a little bit more. As you can see, I'm able to bend that down. If I had the hard cover on there, that just wouldn't work. So if you are going to deconstruct a book with a really thick book like this, I recommend going ahead and removing the cover, because you'll just save yourself some time, and you can use that cover to make another journal later on. And I have done that quite frequently. So here is another issue that is going to come up as soon as I can get to it here. There will be pages that end up with glue affixed to them. So as you can see, I'm not ripping it out. I'm just removing it from those seams. And again, there's quite a bit of glue on this binding, so we are getting a little bit of ripping, but not too bad. But there you can see that one pulled away really well. Okay, now we get to the issue of, now we get glue. So at this point, this outer page of the signature, I hope I'm explaining all this right. So each of these groupings in the book is sewn in groups of usually 8 pages. Let's see how many this one is. So there's one there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Usually in a big book like this, it's usually 8 pages, and they sew them, they put them together like this, they sew them together, that makes the signature, and then they glue it into the binding. So the outer page of your signature is almost always going to be bound to this binding back here. So it makes it pretty much impossible to remove. You can see if you can very carefully lift that away, which I cannot. It's just ripping it. So at this point, what I would do is pull this page out and this page out, and this one, because it's coming with it, and I just rip those out, because this is not salvageable in terms of having a, you know, nice flat full spread. So I keep these as separate. So every book I deconstruct, I have a pile of the signatures that come out all nice with these full spreads. And then I have a pile of single sheets that are the ones that end up glued into the binding that aren't sewn in, they're glued in. So I can't pull them apart to make full spread pages out of them. But I can use them for other things. I can, you know, tear them up and use bits and pieces of the words. I could take out the illustrations, cut them out. You can turn them sideways and glue them into a book this way. That's something that I've done quite frequently as well. So I just end up with a pile of single sheets and a pile of signatures. So that is the other thing to keep a lookout for. And again, see, this is an outer page of the next signature, so it's going to be glued into the binding. So I am going to keep working my way through this book, and this is a long process. So I suggest, you know, turn yourself on some YouTube. That's what I do. Watch some tarot videos while you do this, and or rather listen, because you do need to watch and pay attention to what you're doing. But you know, generally I would have some YouTube videos playing in the background, so that I can, you know, listen to that while I'm sitting here deconstructing a book, because it is a time-consuming process, particularly if you have a big book like this one. So that is that. So I'm going to finish deconstructing this book, and I'm going to do that off camera, or that's going to be very boring. Thank you for joining me for part 1 of the Alice Junk Journal tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.